Hello. This is a re-recording of the control of Legionella in water systems, first delivered a few days ago. I'm Paul Hackett. I'm a consultant with Inhouse, and we're putting this together for ISBL, the expert talks, sharing later on. The aim of the session is to give anybody listening an understanding of the Legionella risk assessment procedure for hot and cold water systems. First of all, we're going to look at what Legionella is, what causes it, how common it is, where it can occur, and who should assess it, and how do we assess it. Legionella is a relatively uncommon form of pneumonia that may have serious consequences for some people, especially those in the older age groups, people who become infected when they breathe in air that contains Legionella bacteria, which have been dispersed in the air in very fine droplets of water known as aerosols. If the bacteria get inhaled into the lungs, they can cause infection. The bacteria live naturally in environmental water sources, but if they get into a water system in a building, they can cause a risk to humans through air conditioning systems or contaminated water systems used for showers, taps, toilets, etc. Control and prevention of the disease is through treatment of the source of infection, i.e. the contaminated water systems. We contract Legionella by inhaling Legionella bacteria. It's either in an aerosol or a droplet nuclei that are contaminated. Also possible inhalation after ingestion of contaminated water. So if you cough or retch after drinking water that has Legionella bacteria in it. There is absolutely no person-to-person spread. So somebody who is sick with Legionella can be tended for quite well by their family and friends. The symptoms, some of you may be familiar with this with the current COVID-19 criteria: dry cough, difficulty in breathing. Some people have diarrhea or vomiting. Some people develop confusion or delirium as they become ill. There are some milder versions of Legionella bacteria called Pontiac fever and Loch Lomond head fever. It's fairly easy treated with antibiotics, should we find it quickly enough. It's a good incubation period of 3 to 6 days. On the outside, 2 to 10 days, depending on how healthy we are. Many people exposed will only develop a mild cold or sniffle without actually getting full-blown Legionella. The infection is fatal in 12% of reported cases. The reported cases are likely to be a very, very severe underestimate of what goes on because of the mild symptoms that people get most of the time. Who's really susceptible will be immunosuppressed patients, people who have an underlying disease, kidney, liver, lung, heart disease. Men are more susceptible than women. Smokers are more susceptible than non-smokers. People who are over 45, usually that's nearer 75 than 45. People who are alcohol dependent, alcoholics, diabetics, cancer patients, kidney diseases, and chronic respiratory ailments. The Legionella disease is believed to account for between 5,000 and 6,000 deaths a year in the UK. This year, we've had 53 reported cases in January. There hasn't been any more since, mainly because probably the people who do the counting are busy with COVID-19. Because Legionella is a very common illness, thousands of Legionella disease cases will probably go unreported. It's only if there is a cluster that Legionella will be looked for and analysed. Most people, most of the origins are going to be from hospitals, in and around the community, near air conditioning plants, big refrigeration units. I'm coming away from on holidays. A lot of the reasons now that we're going to have less Legionella is possibly because for the last 4 or 5 months, none of us have been on holiday overseas. So it's quite a common form of bacteria, and it's found in water sources. It'll survive from anything between 0 degrees centigrade and 60 degrees centigrade, but will gradually die off over 60 degrees. Under 0 degrees, it just goes into stasis and can re-energize itself as soon as it warms up to a sensible level. Below 20 degrees, there won't be any multiplication. Above 60 degrees, the bacteria start to die. So they become dormant in cool water, but they're at their best for multiplication at about 37 degrees. They need nutrients to survive. So they need a good supply of algae, amoeba, sediment, sludge, scale, biofilms in water systems, and organic materials such as rodent droppings or bird droppings, or in fact the bodies of dead rodents and birds in the water system. So usually in things like the header tanks where they haven't got lids on things. Legally, through the Management of Health and Safety at Work Act, we've got a duty to manage the risk from work activities, which includes bacteria. That's dealt with more under the COSH regulations, regulations 6, 7, and 12. The Management of Safety at Work regulations require a risk assessment, which crossovers to the COSH regulations. If somebody becomes ill at work and they have a prescribed job, so air conditioning engineer, water engineer, something of that like ilk, then it would be a reportable illness under RIDHL. If we have Legionella or there is a risk of Legionella, we must report it to our employees and make them aware of it, which is why the safety reps and safety committees regulations or the health and safety consultation with employees regulations come into play. The Health and Safety Executive have written an approved code of practice. It's called L8. It's been reviewed a number of times in the last 15, 20 years. It was 1 document, it's now 2 documents. That contains the best up-to-date information that we can get on this. The water supply, water fittings regulations also comes into play with the requirement not to feed back contaminated water into the main supply. So stop valves, non-return valves, header gaps. There's a whole range of techniques that one use, like ton dishes between your drains and the grounds. If you are lucky enough to be the owner-operator of a cooling tower or an evaporative condenser, you will need to report that to your local authority and tell them where it is and what you do with it. That would not be a major issue for most schools. Where Legionella has made the news, we've got 2 bits of case law. The Health and Safety at Work Act where Section 3 was used to prosecute the Board of Trustees of the Science Museum in 1993. This is where the water system was found to be grossly contaminated with Legionella. Nobody was made ill, there was no hospitalizations, but it was just found to be grossly contaminated. And it was felt that there was a risk that had not been managed. So there was a successful prosecution of the Board of Trustees of the Science Museum. Not so innocently, a few years later, in 2002, both Gillian Beckham, who was the direct employee, and the Barrow Council, who were managing the 428 Arts and Leisure Centre in Barrow-in-Furness, were both prosecuted. They were cleared of manslaughter charges, but Mrs. Beckenham was fined £15,000 and the council £125,000. So the council officer in charge was held personally liable for some of the losses of life after that outbreak. These days, with the new guidance on fines, we'll be looking at possibly 10 times that number. So £1.5 million possibly for the council, £150,000 for Mrs. Beckenham. So I like the code of practice. It gives a duty of the control of Legionella bacteria in water systems to a statutory duty holder. That person will have to be named. In most cases in schools, it will probably be the senior manager, which will be the head teacher. The head teacher must in turn appoint a responsible person to look after the day-to-day management and the correct operation of the water system. In most cases, that will be the premises manager or the equivalent. In some cases, it may well be an outsourced company who is providing plant operation and water management for you. So we need to identify the major hazards. What are going to make these hazards more prevalent? And it will require that we look at the conditions suitable for multiplication. So we're going to have temperatures of between 20 and 45 degrees centigrade. We're going to need nutrients. We need a way of creating and disseminating breathable droplets, something that creates splashes, splashbacks, fine aerosols in the air for people to be able to breathe in. In a lot of cases, the most prevalent one of those is probably going to be a shower system in your school gyms, changing rooms, the changing areas in fields and those sort of things. Now, when we run the showers, if they've not been operating for 3 or 4 weeks, usually that in a school or university scenario, that would be when we've broken up for the summer holidays and the area's been left go quiet, and then we start up again in September. That time the water flow has not been sufficient to break down the bacteria and flush it through on a regular basis. So it can build up in the shower heads and the shower pipelines. Then it's nice and warm and it builds and grows and matures nicely over a period of time. A lot of time, if that happens, it doesn't become a problem because the people who are exposed are young, fit, healthy, non-smoking, non-alcoholic people within the school place. So they don't actually show any symptoms. So we can actually have quite a bad condition of Legionella without it showing too much, because people won't become ill. So we have to take into account who is going to be exposed. Are they of the right sort of people who could become ill with Legionella? So we're going to have a look at the source of water. Is it a mains? Is it a well? Most mains systems are treated with chlorine before you get to them. If the water's running fast and there's a good flow, the chances of there being excessive amounts of Legionella is remote. When we're putting water into storage, we're putting it into a header tank. Is there anywhere where it could be contaminated? Is there a leak? Is there weeping where the water flowing past the area can cause air to be sucked in, or bacteria, or any other source of contamination? Have we got amplifiers? The two main amplifiers are air conditioning systems, whether to have an evaporating cooling system, or spa pools. And again, I don't know of many schools who have either or both of those. Have you got good plant operating procedures? Do you look after your water properly? Is there a reasonable flow of pipes where we can get to all parts of the building easily? Are there unusual but reasonably foreseeable operating conditions where we could be doing something different, where we'd be shut down for a couple of weeks, where we will not be using the school for a couple of weeks, out of the ordinary, such as being shut down since March and not reopening again until September, when there's going to be less water use? What are we doing to maintain that flow of water? Who's going in to run the water through the systems? Right? If we have significant risk and we know it's there, that should be recorded and communicated to everybody. So we have a documented risk assessment. With that documented risk assessment, we should be putting together the control measures and making sure that they're completed and monitored. As an inspector, I will quite regularly go to a site which has a beautiful Legionella risk assessment, and I open up the control section where the water temperatures are supposed to be measured, the flows are supposed to be measured, the Sentinel taps will have their temperatures done. There might even be a requirement to flush out on a regular basis or clean the shower heads. And the recording system is completely empty, meaning that we have identified what we need to do, but then we haven't done anything about it. That risk assessment will be held as evidence against an organisation if it's kept clear and not the recordings are made, monitorings aren't done, and the controls aren't put in place. So we need to have a look at it every couple of years. Every 2 years is considered normal to make sure that it's working and that any changes have been taken into account. It says ineffective on my overheads. I think it means effective. So as a manager, where there is reasonably foreseeable risk that it's reasonably practical to prevent exposure or control from exposure, the duty holder, normally the head teacher, should appoint somebody to take managerial responsibility and supervise the implementation of precautions. Risk assessors should have a reasonable amount of knowledge, ability, experience, and sufficient time to do the job, and sufficient resources. That might be money to buy things they need. They need to be given instructions, information, and training to do their task properly. The assessors should know potential sources of Legionella and the risks they present, what measures might be needed to be used to control Legionella, and the measures to be taken to control controls remain effective. So what do we do to make sure things are working right? It is possible to use people from outside the organisation to do this and outsource it, but it's usually considered better to have somebody inside who's your competent person that can do that. What do I need? I need a thermometer. I need to check the water temperature running at or around the Sentinel taps. What's the cold? Is it suitably cold within 2 minutes from starting it? Is it suitably warm within 2 minutes of starting it? I need a watch with a second hand so I can tell when 2 minutes have gone. I need a torch and a mirror. I need to be able to find thermostatic mixing valves underneath sinks, behind shower units. I've got to be able to look for stuff. We may want a camera to identify things. There will be some beautiful USB cameras now that can stick on the laptop, that can go behind tiling systems, and you can see if there are dead animals or things behind sets of tiles that you wouldn't normally see behind. You need a tape measure to see how long the pipes are. And quite often when we've done changes, we will alter the layout of our pipes, cut things out, take the Belfast sink out and replace it with a broom cupboard. That Belfast sink had a water supply. That water supply is now not being used. That water supply will become contaminated after a while. Where it joins onto the main water supply, they can draw in that contaminated water into the mains system. So we're having a look for dead ends and those sort of things as we're going around. I need to make notes. I might need to undo a drain cock, so I need a spanner. I might need a screwdriver. We'll need to do things. While I'm doing that, I may well get the place a little wet, so I'll need to dry the area as we're going along. Assuming that I am being exposed to Legionella, I should be wearing the appropriate PPE. Now these days, we're all familiar with PPE. I would need something to stop droplets getting into my nose, and I have to stop it from breathing in. So a good FFP face mask would be worthwhile, possibly even the waterproof units. Depending on my skill sets, you may also provide me with dip slides and an incubator for checking the bacteriological content of the water. And those sample kits are available. Again, you need to know how to use them before getting them. So, what are you looking for? You're looking for a nice, clean system, somewhere where the boilers are attached without air being able to get in. You're looking for a header tank, which has got signs on it saying it's been checked. You're having a look at the cover to the header tank, making sure it's on, it's still solid. When you open the header tank, you're not finding bits of plastic, bits of rubbish that have got in there. You're not finding scale, as in the picture that I'm showing you now. You're expecting to see the header tank nicely sealed and insulated with good signage indicating that it has been recently checked. You're not expecting to find scale and corrosion within the unit with sand in the bottom of it. You're expecting that to be clean as you go along. Your pipes leading to your header tanks should be clean, not furred up and full of scale. And we have the checks to make sure the tanks are being looked after properly. So, who's going to be at risk? Again, it will depend what sort of school you are. If you're a standard day-to-day school with fit, healthy students, you'll be less at risk than if you're a special needs school or one that's attached to a hospital. So, you're more likely to have your teachers and staff at risk than the students most of the time. However, if we're running events where we invite family and friends, and we're inviting the grandmothers and grandfathers to come and see their children in plays, then we will then have some people of the correct age group where Legionella may well be more of a risk to them. So we have to think about our visitors, guests, contractors doing work may well be exposed if there is a risk there. We need to avoid exposure so far as is reasonably practicable. If it's not practical to avoid exposure, then we should have a written scheme, a full risk assessment that says what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and when we should be doing tests and checks. We should have a schematic of the plant and the system, including parts not in use. The dead legs are very important. Stuff we're not using is possibly more important than the stuff we are using. A description of the correct and safe operating of the system. So if we've got people who aren't familiar with our plants, we may have contractors in and they don't know how things should be operated, where valves should be open, where they should be closed. Then we should have that written down so that they can read it and then operate the placement correctly. We need to know what precautions have been taken, which precautions were talked about, and which precautions were done. Right? And then we need to make sure the efficiency, the effectiveness of our system. And mainly that will count for biological testing. We will test the microbiological contamination levels of the water system once every year, 6 months, 3 months, depending what the risk is. If we know and it comes out clear every time we do the test, we're doing the job well. If it comes out with a microbiological contamination, then we know we need to do some more. And what are we going to do if it goes wrong? How do we behave? Do we sit back and say, all right, we've got some Legionella in our system? What we need to do is to work out how we're going to deal with it. So what actions are we going to take? Who are we going to call? How are we going to deal with it? Do we need to flood the system with chlorine? Do we need to flush the water? Do we need to raise the temperatures? There are a range of different ways of dealing with this. We need to think about how we're going to do that. So we can prevent water being released as an aerosol or a spray, which means possibly not having shower heads in that format, or making sure that those shower heads are nice, clean, bright, without any scale in them, so that it doesn't come out as microparticles on the outside. Right? We should make sure we try to have water either below 20 degrees or above 45 degrees. So that sometimes means needing a thermostatic mixing valve. So we have water at 65, 70 degrees coming in one side, and water at 10, 16 degrees coming in the other side, and then mixed very close to where we're using it. So we're not circulating the water at a good breeding temperature for Legionella. We make sure we're using lots of water. There's no stagnant water in pipes. Flushing it through on a regular basis. Making sure the water has gone through so there's no chance for biofilms to form in the pipelines. We make sure that we have clean systems, that we haven't got bacteria, we haven't got nutrients, we haven't got dead animals feeding their body parts into our water supply. When that needs to be looked at and checked and make sure that they can't access things. We make sure we clean our system. For some of us, we may need to add chlorine or bromine, but majority of the time we don't need to do that. The use of fresh water flushing through regularly is usually enough. Cleaning your shower heads, cleaning the taps, making sure the thermostatic mixing valves are working properly are the first actions we take before we consider adding additional chemicals, because that brings additional risks and somebody has to get involved with that. And a lot of people don't like the smell and taste of bromine or chlorine in the water. And even when we use it, we still got to flush through. Right? So we try to identify the safe way to operate and maintain our water supply. Once in a while, we have a look at these risk assessments and say, are we doing enough? The test of that possibly be a microbiological test. We'll do a dip slide at different places on the system, have a look and say, have we got any microbiological contamination? We're testing the effectiveness of our risk assessments and how well they're doing. If we get microbiological issues, we then have to go back to square one and find out why we're getting these problems. All right, so the competent person makes sure that we have a written risk assessment. They're appointed in writing. There is a specific named person who is listed as the competent person. They will make sure that we've recorded the significant findings of that risk assessment. They've developed the written scheme, and we have the results of any monitoring, inspection, or tests. If as a new build, I'm having a school built or some renovations done, my contractor will need to make sure that the water system is designed and constructed so it will be safe. So as part of the handover procedures is to ensure that the microbiological security of your water system is intact. With that, they will hand over the risk assessment, saying what they've done, how they've done it, what the measures are to make sure the water is going to stay safe to use. And you'll have a testing procedure to make sure that it ensures the measures are effective and safe. They'll hand over adequate information for you. Sometimes it's not always that easy to understand, but it will be adequate. And if they've given you any limitations, what you can and can't do, what you should or shouldn't do, they will be given to the responsible person, competent person that we've appointed in writing. They've got to ensure their staff are capable and competent when they're fitting in your water systems. There are BSO and ISO standards for construction of water systems, and there are certain legal requirements that your constructors have to stay by. Right? From a new point, there should be no dead legs. If you are doing maintenance work, changing things around, again, the dead legs should be chased right back to the main supply and made sure that they can't contaminate the system. We're trying to make sure it's clean and easy to clean, easy to disinfect should we need to. The pipework should be either copper, some may have lines of silver in them, or plastic, to make sure that it doesn't support microbiological growth. We try to maintain a very low level of water storage. It's becoming less fashionable now to have huge water tanks at the top of buildings. What we're looking for is very small amounts of water storage so that we can flush the water through on a day-to-day basis. They're sized perfectly to be just about running out at the end of the day. Sometimes that means we get air getting in because they've used more than we normally do, but it is more common now to have very small day tanks. On hot water systems, we might not go through a storage tank at all. It'll be a direct feed to unheated. We want to make sure that we're insulating the pipes so that we don't have too much temperature change. That has two effects, especially with cold water. It stops the nasty drips on your ceiling, so you can't trace the cold water pipes. But it also means that we're not going to allow the cold water pipe to get too warm. If you do have the privilege of owning a cooling tower, the drift eliminators have got to be kept in excellent condition. So that is handed over to an expert. These will need to be cleaned. If they're cleaned, we're suspecting that they've got Legionella, which means the people spraying them and cleaning them will need to be dressed up in biological warfare kit to ensure that they're not going to inhale any of the Legionella bacteria. So if you see them in shorts and t-shirts and the hoses, you know that they're not treating it seriously. So risk assessments are checked every 2 years. If there's a change to the water system, we've added a new bit, we've taken something off. If we change how we use the building, now interestingly, in the next couple of months, some of you might be hiring church halls. Some of you might be going to drill halls, which have been used for something different other than education for a period of time. We'll need to check that the water systems are in good order. So as we're trying to make the classrooms less students in them, adding additional student accommodation in different places, that may have an effect on the water system. That needs to be assessed. If we find out that we've got a disproportionate amount of people with COPD, lung disorders, heart failures, working with us or as students, then we may need to review how much work we do on the water system. So, this guidance on the control of Legionella in L8, it covers cooling systems, cooling towers, evaporative condensers, air conditioning systems, spas and whirlpool baths. Now for most schools, air conditioning systems are sealed systems and don't come under this, their sort of series of checks. So this might just be an academic issue. We make sure we eliminate corrosion. We make sure we prevent scale buildup. We try to ensure that there's no fouling from animals or birds. Rats like the warm, pigeons like the warm. If they also happen to be near your water tanks, then that becomes a problem. We try to prevent microbiological activity, the green sticky slime that forms biofilms, which can house Legionella or act as a food source for it. We may need to use biocides, so traditionally there'll be chlorine or bromine. There are some systems that use copper silver anodes, but again they're fairly rare. If you've got one, you'd have specialist advice anyway. And we may need to be doing a reasonable amount of monitoring, checking what's happening in the water, what the microbiological content of it is on a regular basis, what the temperature is at the hot end of the system, at the cold end of the system, as we're going along, how well the water's flowing. A quick one to say what sort of things we might monitor. In the water supply, we would look at calcium hardness, magnesium hardness, total alkalinity, total hardness, chloride levels. We may also look at sulfates, total dissolved solids, suspended solids, inhibitors if they're used. So there might be some inhibitors put into water supplies. Is there any biocide left there? So have you got any chlorine in the water? We'd only be expecting 0.1, 0.2 milligrams per litre of that. What the temperature is, what the pH is. The lower the pH, the less likely we are to get microbiological contamination. The higher it is, 7.8, 7.9, the more likely we are. Is there any iron in the water? Is there any microbiological activity, or is there Legionella specifically? And we check for that probably quarterly. Where it says makeup water, when I delivered this first time around, somebody asked what that is. That is the water that we use to bring in to the header tanks. So it's the water that tops up the header tanks on the bull valve as we're using it. So as the showers and the taps are running, the water levels drop in, the bull valve goes down a bit, the mains water comes in, that's your makeup water. So we need to check what the mains water is. And if you're using cooling waters, there will be an assessment of that. And what we're looking for is the difference. Have we changed the water in some way or another? So in cooling towers, although we don't normally look at this too much for schools, we get worried if the aerobic colony count is above 10,000 milligrams per litre, not milligrams per litre, colony forming units per litre. With Legionella, we'd look at those separately, and that would be 100 colony forming units, and we'd make sure things are getting better than that. So if it's more than 100,000, we're very worried about that. But say most people don't have cooling towers in schools, so they shouldn't be a major problem for you. Okay, biocides are your last resort. We would only use aggressive chemicals if we couldn't control Legionella any other way. The reason for that is if you add an oxidizing agent to your water supply, if you've got a metal header tank, you've got copper piping, steel piping, the biocides, because of their oxidizing level, will cause corrosion. And corrosion shows us rust. Rust can harbor Legionella, so that we can clean it, kill it off, but we're then leaving the system in a potential way where it could harbor Legionella again. So we try not to use biocides in a normal, everyday hot water system. Right? If we're using cooling towers, we may then need to desludge them. So, as I said, oxidizing biocides, chlorine and bromine, we'll use those. We can use the chlorine, get it up to 50 milligrams per litre for an hour, then flush it through, or maybe 2 milligrams per litre for 24 hours, depending on which way we're going to do it. Right? The lower the pH, the less chlorine we need, and it just depends on when we need the building back. If we don't need the building back for 2 or 3 days, we can do a slower, more thorough flushing. We need to dechlorinate either by adding a substance, usually sodium thiosulfate, or allow it to dissipate naturally over a period of time, depending on how much time we've got. If it's things like corrosion or scale, they will need to be physically, manually cleaned. Right? Quite often, we'll get to the stage of some scale. So if we've got metal tanks in the roof, we'd actually get to the stage of saying that we can't keep those any longer, and we may have to replace them with new plastic units. All right, so if you're going to water jet, then we need to make sure we're protected. So, routine cleaning and disinfection. If it's a new building before it's being commissioned, If it's been a major change of things, so we've replaced a boiler, we've replaced a header tank, we need to flush it through there. If it's been closed for a period of time because of summer holidays, or we've been closed for COVID-19, then we need to make sure we do a good clean and disinfection. So if there's any doubt about the cleanliness, then again, we should be looking at a routine disinfection process. If your microbiological monitoring indicates that there is more than 100 colony-forming units of Legionella in your water, then it is required to give it a good clean and disinfect it. So places where we need to look for issues: the basin of your calorifier, where the incoming water mixes with the existing hot water but doesn't get flushed through. When the water held in pipes between circulating supply and an outlet tap or shower, when it's not in use. So we've brought the water into the area, we've warmed it up, we've sat it down in the pipe and then not used it. Rooms that may have been used for dormitories, rooms that may have been used as shower blocks that haven't been used for a while, old gyms, old shower units, old toilet units, those sort of things. If they've not been used for a while, they are higher risk areas. Dead legs, places where we have had a sink, have had a toilet, but then allowed a pipe to stay in existence. That pipe will then get contaminated over a period of years. Where it attaches to the main flow of water, there's a Venturi effect, which sucks out the biofilm and the microbiological material in that pipe into the main flow of water. So it recontaminates on a regular basis. So it doesn't matter how much we disinfect it. If it's staying in a dead leg, we're never going to get rid of that. So what we need to do is get rid of the dead leg. Normal everyday gravity system. Schools, you will have a far bigger thing like this, but what you'll notice at the top of the pictures, we'll have a vent pipe with tundish. They can't, the water supply company will make sure there's a good air gap there. The stop valve will need to be solid and make sure it works particularly well, so there cannot be a return back into the mains from a potentially contaminating system. All right. If you haven't seen one before, this is a thermostatic mixing valve. From one side we have the cold, marked C. The other side we have the hot, marked H. So we have water coming in on one side at less than 20 degrees, on the other side possibly more than 45 degrees. Coming out the bottom will be something that's suitable for a shower at maybe 30, 35 degrees, depending on how hot you like your showers. So what we're going to check. This is all within the realms of a standard everyday check. Anybody that looks after building control can manage these. So on a monthly basis, the Sentinel Temps, the first and last hot tap, the first and last cold tap, the Sentinel Taps. The cold taps, we expect the water to be 20 degrees centigrade within 2 minutes. The hot taps, we expect it to be 50 degrees centigrade within a minute. The input of the thermostatic mixing valve I showed you a moment ago, we expect that to be 20 degrees within 2 minutes. We expect it to be 50 degrees within a minute. It's as if it's a tap, it's a mixing valve. Going back into the main plant room, there will be a calorifier. We need to look at that and have a look at the temperatures. On the way out, we're expecting it to be about 60 degrees. On the way back, after it's done its work, feeding the radiators, feeding the showers, feeding the other parts of your building, 50 degrees centigrade. If you work in soft water areas, you may well be looking at that being 70 and 60. Hard water areas, London, Southeast, 60, 50 is about normal. Right? Each individual plant will be set up to work with the equipment, the boilers, the calorifiers, based on their capabilities. So 50, 60, somewhere in that region. So the incoming cold water supply, winter and summer, we're going to check them to see what they are. There's no standards, that you get what you get, but you then have to deal with them. Annually, you need to count up the number of taps and divide it by your square root. So if you've got 100 taps, you will need to check 10 random taps other than your Sentinel taps, just to make sure they're all coming through 20 degrees within 2 minutes, 50 degrees within a minute. So the biocides, we've talked about it, sodium hypochlorite to chlorine, chlorinated isocyanates, a little more complicated, but they can be easier to use because they come in solid blocks. And you get two versions, fast dissolving, slow dissolving. So they're quite good. Sodium hypochlorite is a liquid bleach. Bromine, again, comes in tablets, which you can use. You drop it into your header tank and it will dissolve slowly. There are some bodies of opinion that says we should use sodium hypochlorite or chlorinated isocyanate on 1 quarter, and then 2 quarters later we would use bromine. We can use chlorine dioxide, again a little more complicated with the mix of chemicals, but very effective. We can use copper-silver systems where we'd have traces of copper, traces of silver in your header tanks, which will stop bacteria from breeding and multiplying, but it doesn't necessarily kill them. So we'd have them, but they would stay at a low level where they wouldn't do any harm. Quite sophisticated systems might use ozone, but we'd need to make sure that we had enough of the flow going through the ozone system. And it's the same with the UV systems. They'd have to be quite big to make sure the full flow of the water went through them to make sure to disinfect it on the way out. So, basic things with the L8, we need to know our source of water, get to know where it comes from, what is normal for our source of water. Is there any way it can become contaminated once it's entered our building? Is there any way that it can get contaminated through normal operations? Are there any odd operations we do where we may have to break the pipework, expose it to the air, or create a vacuum on it, so we're sucking potentially polluted stuff into there? Are all our controls working? Do we know we've got Legionella? Have we tested for it? If we have and it isn't there, some of the controls can be slackened a little bit. Is there a system for amplification? Have we got somewhere where the water can stagnate, the Legionella can breed and then flourish? Is there an air conditioning plant somewhere that it can go in and then the water be evaporated off in an evaporative condenser to concentrating the bacteria? Very similar to a spa or a whirlpool, where the water is warm and it evaporates, focusing, concentrating the bacteria in the water that's left, and then we top it up with a fresh supply of clean water, which then evaporates again, and it goes in a continual process. And that's why they're called amplifiers or multipliers. Is there anywhere where it's going to aerosol? So classically that would be a shower head or a dripping tap. Some of you may even have fountains in your sort of building areas where you can throw water up and make it look nice. Are the people who are going to be exposed vulnerable? Could they be the people who are most likely to be made ill by Legionella? are basically, does your water system work well? Does it do what it's supposed to do? How it's supposed to do it? These are things you need to know and make sure that your competent person is competent enough to know and reassure the responsible person that it is working. So you've got a hazard if Legionella can get into the system. It's in mains water, but at a very low level. It's where it can multiply that becomes a major issue. If there's a doubt, you've got a potential hazard. It's potentially hazardous. Is there any dead legs, areas where we can get microbiological growth? Does the system support growth and distribution? Have you done what you said you were going to do with your previous risk assessment? Or is all the pipe work where you said it is? Is it as built or as altered? Right? If it has been altered, has that been including on your schematics? It may well be that you'll need 2 or 3 sets of schematics, because you may, in some schools, have built up organically. So you'll have a building that was there in 1960, an extra bit that we put up in 1970, an extra bit again in 2000. And they may have all 3 separate different sets of water systems. That means 3 schematics for those buildings. Can I stop scale? Have I prevented scale from being formed? Have I prevented pests from getting in and damaging my water system? Have I prevented pigeons? Have I prevented crows? Have I prevented rats and mice, squirrels from getting in to my water system? Are my tanks sealed well with the lids solidly on top? Or is everything tightened up? Has the insulation been put back on top of their tanks after we've done it? Has it been wrapped around it after we've done any maintenance? Are the pipework re-lagged after we've done any work to them? Evidence of good maintenance. That's what I'd be looking for. So make sure that when we're designing them, it's relatively easy to get in and maintain. So the components and tanks are difficult to access, but relatively simple to maintain. I don't have any dead legs. I make sure I put thermostatic mixing valves on long runs and multiple equipment. So if I've got 4 sets of showers in different parts of the building, I have 4 mixing valves in those different areas to make sure I don't have to have lukewarm water running around long areas. I don't put in bigger tanks than I need. Right? We size them up to work for the right size. And if I just need hot water, I might consider not having a tank at all. I will just use direct heat to the boiler. Is my water quality good? Is the water contaminated? Do I get foam or fluff in it? Is there algae, fungi, bacteria around the place? Are we running at a high risk temperature? And for most of us, we will run at high risk temperatures because the water won't get too much colder than 20 degrees centigrade, and it won't get that much hotter than 50 degrees centigrade. So we are at a almost guaranteed high risk temperature. So, said it before, the records we're supposed to keep, we keep. If we're doing something different, we're deviating from the plan, we make a note of it. If we're breaking a pipe, adding an extra line to it, putting things at risk, then we'll make sure that we've recorded that correctly. We do maintenance when it needs to be done, not later on. And we need to make sure that it's done by somebody who's capable and competent enough to be able to say it's been done well. Any jobs that we've done, we've actioned them, dated them, so that we can say, yeah, we're looking after this water well. If we are going to use bromine, chlorine, chlorine dioxide, copper silver anodes or systems, then we make sure we've got a good cost assessment that goes with it. We describe how we're going to do that job, what the results are going to be, and we make sure that the persons have been trained well enough to be able to do that. Who is the responsible person? Are they visible? Have they got a nominated, visible deputy? Who do we talk to? If I'm having a problem in the area and I need to go check on what the Legionella in your school is like, is the person I need to talk to going to be in my face, looking at me saying, here I am? Or am I going to have to be turning around and saying, well, can we get hold of them? Now, we need this person to be visible. How often have you checked yourself? How often has the head teacher made sure that these jobs are being done, not just being talked about? So your internal audit, reviews, inspections. So anybody that needs to do this sort of work, how well have they been trained? Where did they get that experience from? Where did they get the knowledge from? They don't have to go on a course, but they do have to know what they're doing. Right? Are they suitable for the role? Can they get into the places they need to get to? Have we done the right assessments? Have we watched them to work? Observation of jobs being done, making sure that they're competent. And as your Legionella risk assessment, is it documented? Is it in place? Is it being followed? So could you argue that your foreseeable risk for Legionella has been reduced as far as reasonably practical? Can you identify all the parts of the water system on a schematic plan? Can you describe a good, correct, safe operating procedure? Right. If you can't, we need to make sure we've got a written scheme, put it in place. We should specify the measures to be taken to ensure it stays effective, and we should make sure we put checks in to undertake that. Should ensure the system remains effective. And remedial actions, if the system fails in any way, how should we deal with it? Any water sprays we control. So shower heads being the main one, cleaned on a regular basis. Making sure that our temperatures before the thermostatic valve don't encourage growth. We make sure our water flows regularly. It might seem like a waste of water to run the showers for 10 minutes, and then when we've got nobody in the building, but it stops people inhaling microbiological material. Making sure that we use the right materials when we're building and doing maintenance. Make sure we're cleaning things. You know, wiping over and making sure that the scale's been taken off the shower heads, scale's been taken from the bottom of the tabs. We've stopped pests from getting into the building to contaminate our water supply. And thank you for listening. As I said, this was recorded 2 weeks after we first did it, because we didn't record it properly first time round. So I hope you enjoyed it. If there's any issues, contact Justin at inhousesafety.co.uk and look at the safety mark. Thank you very much.